Well, welcome back. We are on chapter 14. It's been a while, so we're on chapter 14. Sorry, my voice has a little bit of a frog in it today, so I'll do the best I can. Chapter 14 is called Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone and just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of beautiful plum-colored velvet. His trousers were bottle green, his gloves were pearly gray, and in one hand he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin there was a small, neat-pointed black beard, a goatee. And his eyes were the most marvelously bright things. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And oh, how clever he looked! Quick and sharp and full of life. He kept making quick little jerky movements with his head, cocking it this way and that way and taking everything in with those bright twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates and called out, "Welcome, my little friends, welcome to the factory." His voice was high and fluty. "Will you come forward one at a time, please," he called out, "and bring your parents and then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" The big boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Oh, Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you, delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us, and these are your parents? How nice. Come in, that's right, step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else was. "My name's," he said the next child to go forward, "my name's Veruca Salt." "Oh, my dear Veruca, how do you do, and what a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, do you? I always thought that a Veruca was a sort of wart that you got on the sole of your foot, but I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come in. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it, and I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father? How are you, Mr. Salt? And Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go on in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie," cried Mr. Wonka. Well, so there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" Yes, I read all about it in this morning's papers, just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad, so happy for you, and this your grandfather? Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted. All right, excellent. Is everybody in now? 5 children? Yes, good. Now, will you please follow me? Your tour is about to begin. Please keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't want to lose any of you at this stage in the proceedings. Oh, dear me, no. Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron gates closing slowly behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last look at them, and then as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are," said Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through this big red door, please. Yes, that's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of my workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "Well, yeah, but who are your workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You'll see everything as we go along. Are all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing inside a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could have easily been driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. "Oh, how lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know, and what a marvelous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All of the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mint and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossoms and caramels and lemon peels. And from far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy as though some monstrous, gigantic machine were spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. "Now this, my dear children," said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, "this is the main corridor. Will you please hang your coats on these hooks over here, and then follow me? That's the way. Good. Everybody ready? Come on, then. Here we go. He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him. All the visitors hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people when you think of it. I mean, there were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all. So you can imagine that there was a good deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. "Come on," said Mr. Wonka. "Get a move on, please. We'll never get around to everything if you dawdle like this." And soon he turned right off the main corridor into another slightly narrower passages, and then he turned left, and then left again, and then right, and then left, and then right, and then right, and then left. This place is like a gigantic rabbit warren, with passages leading this way and that way in every direction. "Don't you let go of my hand, Charlie," whispered Grandpa Joe. "Notice how all these passages are sloping downwards," said Mr. Wonka. "We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep below the surface." "Why is that?" somebody asked. "Well, there wouldn't be nearly enough space for them up on top," answered Mr. Wonka. "These rooms you're going to see are enormous. They're larger than football fields. No building in the world would be big enough to house them. But down here, under the ground, I got all the space I want. There's no limit to it as long as I hollow it out." Mr. Wonka turned right and then left and then right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. And then suddenly Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him there was a shiny metal door. The party crowded around. On the door it said in large letters, "The Chocolate Room." We'll read chapter 15 tomorrow.